World-made men. History shapes a persona about which stories are told. John Kennedy, the 35th President of America, was at the helm of the country from 1961 to 1963. That is, only half a term. The youngest president in the history of the country was an innovator in politics. Charismatic and communicative, he was the first to make his television image a trump card in the election battle. Many modern political technologies owe their creation to him. The Apollo program, the strategy of soft power in foreign policy, and reforms in domestic policy that took shape at the end of the 20th century became the core of American leadership. So, what stands behind his assassination? Assassination of John Kennedy. Mafia or presidential curse? Born May 29, 1917. John was the second son in a well-to-do and ambitious Kennedy family. He did not study very well, never stood out for obedience, changed schools and universities. However, according to the family tradition, he did after all graduate from Harvard and decided to study law at Yale University. But then, the Second World War broke out. Without a moment's hesitation, John hurried to enroll in the Army. Because of health conditions, he could only be offered a staff job. But the guy still managed to get appointed to the Pacific Fleet as an officer in a high-speed torpedo boat. On August 2, 1943, a group of 16 boats, including the one Kennedy served on, were ordered to attack Japanese ships. During the battle at night, an American boat was rammed through by a Japanese destroyer, during which severe damage was inflicted to John's lower back, which had already been injured. Despite this, it was through his intelligent actions that 11 crew members were saved. Moreover, John personally towed one of the injured. For his bravery in the warfare, Kennedy was awarded numerous orders and medals. The war dramatically changed the lives and destinies of millions of people, including John. In 1944, his elder brother, Joseph Patrick, who served as a military pilot, died. This meant John was now left to fulfill his family's political ambitions. All of his closest relatives, both from his mother's and father's side, were part of this business, so that John's fate was predestined. He began his political career immediately after the war, and in 1947, he was already elected to the U.S. House of Representatives. From 1953 to 1960, he was a senator from Massachusetts, and in 1960, he ran for presidency. Perhaps quite unexpectedly for many, the 43-year-old Democrat Kennedy defeated Republican Richard Nixon. The narrow margin hardly mattered as long as he won the race. On January 20th, 1961, during his inauguration, John Kennedy uttered a phrase that won fame overnight. Ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country. These words contain a philosophy of true patriotism. Through dedicated work during his short time in office, Kennedy sustained his thesis with flying colors. Watch this video to find out why Kennedy's assassination remained a cold case. To understand the motives of his assassination, we need to analyze not only what President Kennedy did, but also for what purpose. For example, in domestic politics, he undertook serious steps in overcoming racial discrimination. Following Abraham Lincoln's model, Kennedy advocated for equal rights for Black Americans. He strengthened state control over the military-industrial complex and the intelligence services, as well as monopolies. He signed an order that gave the U.S. government the right to issue money bypassing the Federal Reserve Bank, being convinced that it was the state's prerogative and not that of a private organization. It is thus starkly obvious that Kennedy made some powerful enemies among major bankers, industrialists, and the military. No wonder these sectors are believed to be involved in his assassination. Other researchers of this tragedy believe that paymasters should be sought in the mafia and secret organizations, more specifically in Freemasonry. Shortly before his death, Kennedy said, "We are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies. to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings. For we are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that relies primarily on covert means for expanding its sphere of influence. By the way, Kennedy was the only U.S. president who never was a member of any secret organization. But if the version about the involvement of Brotherhood can hardly be taken seriously, the Mafia trace gives pause for thought. It was Robert Kennedy, the president's brother, and the U.S. Attorney General who effectively confronted Mafia. The American journalist Stefano Vaccaro wrote, "The boss of Mafia swore to seek revenge, but he wouldn't be able to murder Kennedy if he didn't realize everyone around him wanted his death." Kennedy got on the wrong side of many in Washington, including CIA, by dismissing Allen Dulles after a scandal for the enrollment or agents from Mafia. This situation with regard to foreign policy was just equally complicated. 3 years of Kennedy's presidency were marked by a failed landing in the Bay of Pigs, the Berlin and the Caribbean crisis, enhanced U.S. intervention in the Civil War in southern Vietnam, strained relations with the USSR with subsequent search for points of convergence. It goes without saying that given all the hassle he had made in foreign and domestic politics, he had to face multiple challenges, while it was time to think about the upcoming elections. That is why Kennedy made a campaign trip to Texas on November 22, 1963. On one of the central streets of Dallas, President Kennedy was fatally wounded by a sniper. Lee Harvey Oswald was convicted and arrested, and just 2 days later, shot to death by a nightclub owner, Jack Ruby, who, no fluke, died mysteriously immediately after his arrest. The list of people who knew anything or were somehow involved in this case, from journalists to mobsters, is impressive. This is the reason of common dissatisfaction with the findings of the investigation carried out by the Warren Commission, established by the Congress for that very purpose. The report concluded that the president was killed by Lee Harvey Oswald, who acted at his sole discretion. The version of personal enmity never seemed to be convincing, though. And then the questions who and why remain unanswered. There is yet another factor in this strange murder, the element of mysticism. Before the fatal trip, Kennedy told his wife, "But Jackie, if somebody wants to shoot me from a window with a rifle, nobody can stop it, so why worry about it?" A few hours later, fatal shots were heard at Dealey Plaza from a window. Just as a side note, all these things inevitably rings the bell about the Tecumseh's Curse, which assumes a certain pattern of deaths in office of presidents of the United States elected in years that are evenly divisible by 20. John Kennedy was elected the president on November 8, 1960. Controversial policy or the presidential curse? What's your version of Kennedy's assassination?
If you like this video, don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel. Thank you for watching.